Aje daner khete rodra chaya, luko churi khela re bhai. Oh well, that's the Calcutta of my childhood. With Tagore, Gurudev, Rabindranath, call him what you will. The great poet, the nationalist, the patriot, the painter, the beginner of the Rabindra Sangeet. You know what that song was telling us? That today on the paddy fields we are playing. Who's playing? The rays of the sun and the shadows are playing hide and seek. And that's why I'm so happy to be doing today Paper Boats by Rabindranath Tagore. When we think of Rabindranath Tagore, naturally we are thinking of the beginnings of Indian poetry in English. Of course, it was almost 30 to 40 years before that we did have the Dutt sisters and De Rosio writing poetry. But when we look of Tagore and think of the poetry that he wrote, we have to remember that he was a bilingual poet. So we are looking at the age when already the Indian Renaissance had happened, when already the freedom movement was seeming to be quite a reality. And it is with this background that Tagore appears. So the age is one of great patriotism. The age is one in which Indian writers began to look at the possibility of writing in English. Well, this period was actually the period of Bengal, because most of the poets that we are going to be looking at when we talk of Indian writing in English, poetry in particular, are all educated, English educated, upper class, Bengali, Bhadralok as we would call them. And in this age we have Gurudev, Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore, 1861 to 1941, deserves credit for ever so many reasons. And one that we all remember and know, of course, is the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. It's another matter that he decided to return it. Well, that was for his well-known Gitanjali, which he wrote in Bengali and later himself translated into English. Interestingly, he believed that a translation can never do justice to the original. Tagore wrote plays, Tagore wrote novels, Tagore wrote short stories, he painted, and remember, he also popularized what we know today as Rabindra Sangeet. Probably there is no Bengali, no person who knows the Bengali language who will not be aware of this special class of music. So Tagore as a poet is what we will be looking at today. Paper Boats was written in 1913 and is one of the many poets that Tagore wrote about childhood experiences, about the child, about the dreams, about the fantasies of a child. Let me begin by reading the poem to you. Day by day, I float my paper boats one by one down the running stream. In big black letters, I write my name on them and the name of the village where I live. Is there anyone amongst us who does not remember the little puddles maybe in which we made paper boats and allowed them to float by? Oh, those days of the monsoon. And Tagore's protagonist in this poem is no different. Tagore writes with the I, but I want to remember, you to remember, remind you once again that not all I's in a poem makes it autobiographical. But of course, it is the innocence of the child who was making paper boats and allowing them to float by. And on the boat, on the paper with which the boat is made, in big black letters, I write my name and the name of the village where I live. You know, the imagination, the innocence of the child, which makes him imagine that this boat is going to float by from the streets of Calcutta, maybe somewhere down the Hooghly, maybe right into Bangladesh, or if you please, into the Ganges, etc., etc. So he also writes the name of the village. I hope that someone in some strange land will find them and know who I am. Wanting to be recognized, the identity, the child wants to be recognized. Some of you might remember, we used to have what we call pen friends. So we used to write to people we did not know, we had never met. Oh my God, I'm talking of half a century ago. And Tagore is probably writing, no, not probably, is writing more than a century ago. I just mentioned to you that the poem was written in 1913. So what do these boats carry? I load my little boats with showy flowers from our garden and hope that these blooms of the dawn will be carried safely to land in the night. Tagore is very imaginative, but Tagore is also a nature lover. So the boats are filled with the showy flowers. Showy, a Bengali word for what we better know as the parijata. A beautiful, delicate flower, a white flower with an orange kind of a stalk. In Tamil, we have a wonderful name for it. We call it the Pavaramalli. That means the mogra with corals, because the stalk is the color of corals. And then he wants it to float by and land somewhere in the night. I launch my paper boats and look up into the sky and see the little clouds setting their white bulging sails. There seem to be some kind of a reflection. The white boats on the water here and the clouds also white, floating. It's daytime now, but it will continue right into the night. I know not what playmate of mine in the sky sends them down the air to race with my boats. We need a lot of imagination, and the poet is filled with imagination when he thinks that there's some sort of a connection, a contact between the clouds and the boats here. Of course, needless to say that the clouds are there, because when I am plying my boats, obviously it has to be monsoon, because only then I have these little streams on the road outside. When night comes, I bury my face in my arms and dream that my paper boats float on and on under the midnight stars. Who is to stop you from imagining? How far do my boats go? Do my boats go only in the night or only in the day? Do they have to pause because it has become dark? The child's innocence does not need any logic. Remember, we were already warned by poets like Wordsworth, do not dissect your poetry, just enjoy your poetry. The fairies of sleep are sailing in them, and their lading is their baskets full of dreams. He talked about the showy flowers, but here he says what they really carry are my dreams. And nothing is to stop my paper boats floating down the stream, loaded with my dreams. A great poem is filled with a great number of figures of speech. So here too we have. But those of you who have heard some of my earlier lectures are probably by now familiar with some of the common figures of speech. Do I need to describe to you what a metaphor is, what a symbol is, what alliteration is? I think you can go and do a little bit of revision and probably have a clearer idea about what these figures of speech are. Let me talk about the assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sounds. You have consonants, which is the repetition of consonant sounds. So the poet uses float, boat. I hope you get what I'm saying. The O is common, that is repeated, not necessarily in words following each other, but certainly within the same line. So you've got float and you've got boat. And similarly, you could look at many others. Name, for example, you will have to look for them. Big, what is the vowel sound there and where do you find it repeated? I just gave you boat and float. You can look at load and many more like that. Consonance is a similar one, but where you have the consonant sound, not the vowel sound, right? So consonants is the repetition of the consonant sounds. So you've got sir, for example, someone, some, strange, etc. We have alliteration. Again, we've seen alliteration in ever so many poems, right? And remember, we've talked about enjambment, where there is a punctuation mark somewhere in the middle of the line. So we don't have the line ending in poetic terms only at the end. So we have to read it continuously. Take a deeper breath maybe and continue. Don't make it sound very breathless. The village where I live, I hope that's someone, right? So in the middle of the line. And that is why you notice that in this poem, Tagore has a very irregular kind of line scheme. I'm not talking of rhyme scheme. I'm talking of line scheme is also very, very irregular, which makes it interesting. I'm talking of figures of speech, but the persona of the poet is also important. I'm wondering, is it a boy or is it a girl? Nowhere in the poem do we get the clear idea of whether this I here is a girl or a boy. And then you might get into a discussion about who makes paper boats. It's only boys who make. And somebody will say, no, I'm a girl and I love making paper boats. So that's a question that one could stop and think. And that is what makes Tagore a greater poet. He doesn't give us pat answers. As I read Tagore's poem, Paper Boats, there comes to my mind ever so many poems. I remember the house where I was born. My heart leaps up when I see a rainbow in the sky, etc. To read these poems, to appreciate what childhood memories, what childhood innocence, what fantasies the lives of children are filled with. Happy reading and happy memories of our childhood.